Hello there, everyone. This is Lego once again with a shadow project. At this point, I should probably just rename my channel to Lego Makes Shadow Projects. But nonetheless, I had an idea once again, and I had to make it. That's how this thing goes. Um, Pretty standard workflow at this point. I import the image, I start tracing manually, and get out of my video. Discord, be quiet. Um, yeah, some pretty standard tracing here. I'm starting off by tracing the core figure, and then I'm going to look at all the add-ons separately. So things like ice picks and various other small things sticking out. So I can sit down and decide on a case-by-case basis if I want to add those elements to the shadow, or if I want to discard them. Because as always, the composition of an image changes when you make it into a silhouette. So there are certain elements that work and certain elements that don't work when you lose all the differentiating factors. So at this point, I've made the core character, and then I'm cutting off. Actually, I decided to cut off a bit of the jacket there, the front, because I want the option of doing some separate color work on that. Um, because it's a bit further back in the picture, so I might decide on some shadow work there to sort of distinguish that, because otherwise if it's just plain black like the rest of it, that particular part of the shadow looks a bit odd if you don't know what's going on. You just have a character hanging on a wall and there's this weird spike going out front. So I wasn't sure about that, so I made it separately in case I want to get rid of it, or in case I want to differentiate it by doing some color work, so that it makes a bit more sense, so that people can like sort of decipher what it's supposed to be. And I'm going to do the same with the pickaxes, ice picks, and I'm going to trace the arm there. You can see because of the way the posture is, um, it looks a bit weird with the pickaxe, just the ice pick, sorry, the ice pick going sort of the way it's laid out, the way its composition is relative to the figure. It looks a bit awkward. So you sort of need the arm there to make sense of why the ice pick is just jutting out the way it is. So I made the arm separately also, in the hopes that I can make make it look not weird. And I've made these pickaxes, ice picks, a couple of times now. The workflow is usually just tracing the core profile and then adding a bunch of strokes, small strokes, as the spikes itself, because they're easier to make after the fact. And then we got the other one right there, halfway embedded into the ice, and adding the rough the teeth, I suppose. And having done that, it's time to focus on some of the small stuff. Like, I'm no climbing expert. I don't know what those are supposed to be. Um, they don't look like they are any sort of what are they called? The carbines. They don't look like carbines. They look like, I don't know, counterweights, or like safety pins or something. I'm not sure, but it's not my job to know. I just do it. Actually, it's not even a job. It's just no mind. Um, I traced them anyway. Some of it I didn't go for all the details. I also discarded the rope itself, because that would just add some noise to the picture. And I kind of like the idea of her just hanging off her ice picks, just completely unsupported by anything, no safety nets. So I did remove the rope, and now I'm actually tracing. I decided to go with the same background, the same the ice wall, after experimenting a bit to see if I could make another um, position possible by altering the position of the ice. But the way her pose is laid out, the composition of her feet and the way she looks off in one direction, it mostly makes sense on the particular ice wall she's at. So I decided to keep the same ice wall just to make sure that the composition made sense. Um, so I made the wall itself, and now I'm going to see if I can do a bit of work on the colors, so to make it a bit more like like some icy walls. Um, I could apply a texture just right off the bat, but I think it's important to get a as close to the final product as you can by using some simple colors, maybe some shadow work, maybe some blurs before you actually add a texture, because the texture in and of itself is fine, but you don't really get the control that you get by adding these various different other modifiers first. Like if I can get close to something that looks like ice before I even apply the texture, then the texture is just going to add so much more on top. So if I do use textures, I'm always doing some color work beforehand, because I don't want the texture to try and hold up the whole project on its own. That's not that's not the way I work. So the arm there, I'm trying to pay a special attention to the way the light works around that arm to distinguish it from the silhouette in the back, but also trying to not make it stand out too much. Um, I'm still not totally confident in the way I do two-tone silhouettes, um, especially by hand. It's still a pretty new trick to me. And in newer projects, since this project was made, I've actually started to dabble pretty much in clipping effects to actually elevate the way I can do these things better without affecting the rest. So at the time I made this project, this was the best I knew how. But if I had to redo this today, I would probably use some clipping effects. Now I tried to make some extra color quantization, some extra differentiation on the outer wall by adding some cracks. Now I ended up actually not going with this, because the cracks I made, they were a bit too on the nose, a bit too big and obvious. I could do some very subtle cracks just by lowering the opacity a lot and doing a lot of smaller cuts all over the place, but I ended up actually not doing that, especially because I remember that I do need to have text. So the space where I was adding my cracks was actually going to be needed to occupy uh, some characters instead. So I scrapped that, made that black, and sort of worked out how I wanted the ice picks to look instead. And again, I tend to do these in more darker colors. I don't want a totally red X. I just want a dark red X to distinguish it from the rest of the silhouette and make them stand out a bit, because they are pretty iconic tools of hers at this point. And having embedded piece of texture now, I am adding that onto the silhouette background there, and figuring out how I want the transparency to shine through and how I want the underlying colors to work off of that, so it's not just one to one. Because otherwise, it's a bit of a balance between making it blend too much in so that you don't actually see it, and making it too on the nose so that you don't really get anything else. Like it's a bit of a balance. But I think at this point I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. It's just enough that you are not in doubt about what you're looking at, but at the same time, it's not dominating the whole picture. So moving on to text, I originally thought I was going to do some classic, at this point, skeleton Sherman, but having worked on this now for a bit of an hour, I know the composition changed a bit from what I initially thought I was going to do. And at this point, it just made a lot more sense to do a piece of unfurled Gallifreyan like snaking down along the wall beside her. So that's what I did instead. Not not skeleton Sherman, just unfurled regular Sherman. Totally legit this time, with some spacing in between the characters once I'm done to make up the words. And I did two things I'm kind of proud of this time. I made some fancy line work in a couple of places. This is one of them, sort of an arrow thing I had going for me there to just sort of break up the monotony and add in some more interesting elements. So this is just a fancy line modifier disguised as an arrowhead. Um, so I kind of like that. And at the other end of the spectrum, we just have some regular run-of-the-mill Shermans to sort of bind together. I'm keeping the line work pretty light. I'm keeping the modifiers pretty light. I'm not doing anything real fancy with anything. Um, the text itself stands pretty much on its own. There's no need to make a lot of flashy stuff. And I am going to color code this, also work it into the transparency and the texture itself, so that it becomes part of the ice wall essentially, or at least that's what I hope. So now I'm just adding some subtle effects. I'm trying to make that into a bit of a feather thing at the end there, some fletching, and I just ended up making a marker instead and stealing that off of that instead of making it from the bottom. Ta-da! Cheap feather. And at this point, I found out that I actually missed a line um, on the H. So in a moment, I'll have to improvise that, and I'm actually pretty happy with what I ended up doing because well, you'll see in a moment. Once I realize my mistake, because first off, I'm tying this back into the texture, masking that on. And then I'm making a bit of a background because the right side of the image is transparent right now, and I need this to be not transparent. So I just made a quick background and then added in some watercolors for her breath because it's pretty cold where she's at. So I just add a little bit of a breath cloud there just to add some atmosphere and give it a bit of a detail in that side of the drawing. And I kind of like it. It's really simple, but it adds a bit of a bit of something. Um, and I tried to look over various other usages for the mist, maybe make some misty mountains or something. But I ended up just not really liking it. It was too much noise, um, so I got rid of most of that pretty fast. But and then I decided that the arm was not good enough suddenly, so I tried to make another iteration of that because having gone this far now, I have a better idea of the proportions, the better idea of the composition and the color work and the palettes. So as I go along, I might cycle through different variations of different aspects of my projects. This is just one of them. In this case, I decided that I had come far enough now to have a better idea of what I actually wanted. So, having done that, oh wait, it's done. Never mind.